Good evening. This is CBS 6 Nightly News. I'm Tanner White, and today we've had a heartbreaking incident occur at Kent State. With more on the story, here's Chris Locker.
We have some sad news coming from Kent, Ohio, at Kent State University this evening.
We have some sad news coming from Kent, Ohio, at Kent State University this evening. Earlier today, a group of students were protesting against the Cambodian campaign issued by Richard Nixon a few days ago. The Cambodian campaign sent troops to invade neutral Cambodia. America has been trying to keep Cambodia neutral since the beginning of the war, but because of the recent communism forces flaring up, the United States decided to invade to help secure the new Cambodian government from communist control just days ago. Troops were sent into Cambodia to destroy communist sanctuaries and cut off supply lines. This has angered many college students who believe that this step of invading Cambodia is enlarging the Vietnam War that President Nixon promised to end. Over the past few days, this has caused many protests around the country, most notably at Kent State University. Some of these rallies and protests have turned violent, but nothing like the tragedy that struck the campus today. About 2,000 students congregated together at noon and retaliated against the National Guardsmen's efforts to disperse the protest by throwing rocks and cursing at them. A few moments later, one guardsman opened fire, and others followed. Early reports indicate roughly 61 rounds were fired, which lasted a total of 13 seconds. Tragically, 4 students, Allison Krause, Jeffrey Miller, Sansa Shore, and William Schroeder, were all killed. Only Krause and Miller were protesting. The other 2 murdered victims were innocently walking hundreds of feet from the protests in between classes. An additional 9 were wounded, 1 who has been paralyzed. We have received word since the shootings that many students from around the country have been trying to organize strikes. When we have more information and updates and further developments from Kent State and these catastrophic events that have unfolded today, we will let you know.
Now we have a first-hand witness, a Kent State student, on the phone with us.
Thank you for speaking with us. Can you please describe what you saw today? Yes, thanks for having me on. The shots were definitely coming my way, because when a bullet passes your head, it makes a crack. I hit the ground behind the curve looking over. I saw a student hit. He stumbled and fell to where he was running towards a car. Another student tried to pull him behind the car. Bullets were coming through the windows of the car. As the student fell behind the car, I saw another student go down next to the curb on the far side of the automobile, maybe 25 or 30 yards from where I was lying. It was maybe 25, 30, 35 seconds of sporadic firing. The firing stopped. I lay there maybe 10 or 15 seconds. I got up. I saw 4 or 5 students lying around the lot. By this time, it was like mass hysteria. Students were crying. They were screaming for ambulances. I heard some girl screaming, "They didn't have blank. They didn't have blank. No, they didn't."
Thank you for speaking with us. Sorry for what you had to experience today. We all hope things get better for all the students who had to witness such traumatic events today.
All right, Chris, that's just a tragedy. All right, now we'll be taking over to Carter Hayes, who will be reporting on this Curt flood incident. Carter?
It's been almost 2 years since Curt Flood wrote to the commissioner asking him to be a free agent, and then pursued a $1 million lawsuit in 1970. Flood, up to this point, was a good player for the league, both in terms of his talent on the field and his respectful behavior off the field. He sat out this 1970 season and played only 13 games last year. The main issue that the court's 5-3 decision earlier today affects is that it upholds the reserve clause. The reserve clause, through an exemption of the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, gives the owners complete power over the players. Much criticism is already being received from the court and its Chief Justice, Harry Blackmun, but the owners in baseball are showing much praise of the decision. Although Flood had no active players testify for him, many greats such as Jackie Robinson and others contributed to Flood's case. Flood will surely appeal the ruling over the next couple days. Now we're going to see if in the next couple of hours as they file out of the courtroom, if we can get a reaction from either Mr. Flood, the commissioner, or any of the Supreme Court justices. Thank you. Now we have Mr. Flood on the phone. We managed to get him. It was very difficult, but you know CBS 6, we always tend to get everyone that we need. And Mr. Flood, I'd just like to ask you a couple questions. First, what do you think of the court's ruling? Thanks, Carter. Thanks for having me on. After 12 years in the major leagues, I do not feel I'm a piece of property to be bought and sold irrespective of my wishes. I believe that any system which produces that result violates my basic rights as a citizen and is inconsistent with the laws of the United States and of the several states. Mr. Flo, we really appreciate your insight and your opinion of the situation and you coming on to the show today. So we'll keep following the story and see if any new developments occur.
Wow, it seems like the MLB is going to be happy with that decision, but it's going to be interesting to see how the players react. You know, with all this talk of the counterculture and the new left still surviving into this decade when only it was really thriving for the past decade, one might ask, how did it survive? And a big driving force behind such as the feminist movement, the black liberation movement, and even the hippie movement, the writers. Today we're going to have Fred Wesley on the case. Take it away, Fred. Tanner, the feminist movement, the black liberation movement, and the hippie movement. All part of the new left, all thriving in the 60s. But it's the 70s now. Now who and where did they come from is a different story, but how are they connected is really what we're going to be talking about today. And a big part of how they're connected is the literature. The writers of Rebellion and Discontent from the 60s have a lot in common, but they have different goals.
The 1950s hosted a number of rebellious writers who labeled themselves the Beatniks. The Beats can be described as writers who resented a conformist society. Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, and William S. Burroughs were viewed as radicals because they were so instrumental in changing a society that they believed to be controlling the people. Personal and civil liberties were a huge part of what the Beats wanted to come as a result of their writings. The 60s and early 70s marked a new period of writers branching from the new left and counterculture. They too wanted personal freedom and for society to stop telling them what to be and how to act. The feminist movement of the 1960s created writers such as Betty Friedan, Gloria Steinem, and Toni Morrison. These writers wanted women to be truly individual and not to be controlled by marriage in a male-dominated society. Friedan's The Feminist Mystique is the work that best sums up the feminist goals. Friedan had conducted a series of interviews with housewives to show that they must branch outside of the home to find a personal calling, aside from being a wife and mother. The next movement of literature comes from the Black Liberation Movement. The most notable work, the autobiography of Malcolm X, is an account of the black nationalist and poster child of Nation of Islam, Malcolm Little's life. The Black Rage writers' goals were to encourage African Americans to retaliate against the white man's oppressive force and to fight for their own civil liberties. Lastly, the writers associated with the counterculture are the most similar to the Beats due to the fact that they resented conformity and societal norms. Hunter Thompson and King Kesey both embody life on the road and going against traditional society. Through their critique of society and politics, self-expression, and unconventional use of drugs, Thompson and Kesey rose to fame with the works Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, an account of a cross-country road trip to Las Vegas, an historical marker of the end of the counterculture, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, a tale of a mental patient's uprising against a demonic Nurse Ratched. Both stories embody the counterculture and have made a mark on modern literature today. The writers of each time period are connected with the Beats because their goal is to ultimately change society to fit their own views of what the world should be. The literature of Rebellion and Discontent is the pinnacle of writing that expresses beliefs that were viewed as radical at the time, and it has influenced society today. Thanks so much. I'm Fred Wesley, CBS 6 News.
I think in conclusion, we can say that societal norms and conformity just did not fit with them very well. Well, that's all for tonight. 3 topics connect. Well, for starters, all three were a desperate cry for personal liberty. Curt Flood did not feel like an individual athlete. He felt like property to sports agencies. The Kent State protesters were exercising their freedom of speech for a reason they felt was necessary, stopping the bloodshed across the Pacific. And finally, all of the riders of the rebellion era of the 60s and 70s were carrying on the Beat's legacy by challenging societal norms, whether it be gender roles, race relations, or conformity. Well, I want to personally thank you for joining us this evening. That about wraps it up. Thank you, Richmond, and have a good night.